Good evening. Hi, I'm Monica Bessem, and I'm presenting Migra, Chapter 5, A New Beginning by Kelly Little Hernandez. So, Chapter 5, we enter into World War II, and the priorities for the border has shifted to be on the lookout for new suspicious level of activity. They were afraid that there could be Nazi sympathizers coming in and some other basic battles coming in and infiltrating America. The anxieties of a nation at war rushed through the U.S. Border Patrol, transforming its national organization, swelling the number of personnel, and introducing new concerns regarding border enforcement and immigration control. Substantive structural reorganization of Border Patrol administration meant that for the first time, U.S. immigration law enforcement was designed to respond to national concerns and centrally defined imperatives. Page 103. Unpatrolled borders became a focus. In this introduction, this chapter addresses the dramatic transformation in the men, the mandate, and the organization of the U.S. Border Patrol during World War II, and examines how, both in spite of and because of these dramatic changes, U.S. Border Patrol's focus upon policing unsanctioned Mexican immigration intensified during the 1940s. Anxiety, DOJ transferred, and new budget. In 1940, Congress transferred the INS, which was the Immigration National Service, from the Department of Labor to the Department of Justice, and supplemented the U.S. Border Patrol's budget with a $2 million appropriation for 712 additional officers. Overall, the Border Patrol's appropriation doubled from $1,735,000 in 1939 to $3,833,400 in 1941. The transfer to the DOJ also legitimized the INS into the sector of law enforcement with the likes of the U.S. Marshals and the FBI. This also gave them a resemblance of authority and power and respect in a national level. This allowed for technological advancements, with radio technology requiring to learn Morse code in the early stages. They also had descriptions of the new patrol cars when they had to stop and try to call in. You can imagine them pulling out all these antennas because, like we know now, every band of radio would require a different antenna for AM, FM, high, low, all that CB. And so it was not yet advanced enough in the time of a pursuit until the FM radio introduction of the 1950s. Also, they acquired three Al-5 Stinson airplanes that were decommissioned after the use of World War II. Here is a picture I found off of Wikipedia, and this was given to the Border Patrol. And this made apprehension of groups and people hiding in unmanageable terrain the ability to go ahead and radio to command, get more officers there, and kind of rally. Now, in this, we are seeing that one plane, sorry, let me go back to the planes real quick. By 1953, at least one plane and pilot was assigned to each sector along the U.S.-Mexican border. And then, in many ways, World War II was a rebirth for the national police force that had long ago yielded to local control. The wartime appropriations and reorganization transformed the U.S. Border Patrol from a series of small and locally oriented outposts into a national police force with the resources to pursue immigration control on a much larger scale. World War II, in other words, ripped the U.S. Border Patrol from its local roots and marked a new era in its development, and that's on page 105. So now in the new recruits, we're finding that we have double the workforce, and so we don't have opportunities to make them do the full civil exam. We had a lot of men serving during that time, and the civil exams were hard, but many people traveled from the north would take those exams and realize that they could have a better opportunity. When they realized they could not get many people that would go into the Border Patrol or move to those areas, they had to lax the requirements. And then there was like an all-out call for anyone that you might know that you may think is somewhat moral or somewhat upstanding. Who cares? We'll take them. What happened was when they laxed those requirements, they also laxed the training, and they no longer required that they had to do the 2-year full Border Patrol officer training that was now required. And so they were having people that were out in the field that did never even shot a weapon, never even apprehended a person. All they knew was book things, or they didn't even have any training at all. And in page 108, there is a story of making sure you have an alibi gun because all the old timers knew was a unhuman resource type, all outlaw type border patrol. They got to do whatever they want. They were the good old boys club. Whatever they said went, as we saw in previous chapters of the officers getting away with murdering people that looked Mexican. So they would make sure that they had an alibi gun because there is a story about the Brotherhood. And from the story, the new recruit learned the aggressive caution was to be taken in unsure moments in what followed. He learned that the old timers' way was defined by a brotherhood of officers to escape persecution. All of the patrol officers' friends, knew that they had to have an alibi gun. He had to have a gun in the canal if that's where this man threw one. And the story on page 108 talks about a smuggler who had to have pitched a gun because the border patrol shot him. And when they went to dredge that canal to look for the weapon, there were 6 guns in the canal. Now we're going to talk about Mexican labor, and that is the next segment of this chapter. Control and managed system of legal migration and all of the associated benefits of Mexico seemed better than a rise in unregulated and illegal border crossings, page 109. Growers in the southwestern United States expanded their acreage and anxiously recruited Mexican workers. Complaining of labor shortages and seeking increased control over the arrival and departure of Mexican workers, southwestern farmers, namely the Californians, lobbied Congress for a labor recruitment program to increase and guarantee the number of Mexican laborers available to the U.S. farms in 1941. U.S. officials approached the Mexican government with the idea of establishing a bilateral labor program that would facilitate the short-term labor migration of Mexican workers into and out of the United States, page 109. So at this time, the Bracero program was created. The Bracero program offered Mexicans wanting to work in the United States the opportunity to do so legally. Bracero contracts quickly became valued commodities. In the Mexican countryside, where underemployed Mexican campesinos once again hoped that work in the United States would provide sustenance in Mexico. This time, however, officials of the U.S. and Mexican governments hoped to exercise greater control over the flow of Mexican migration. Page 110. Unfortunately, many people did not fall under this Bracero program again, and so you're going to have illegal migration. And they said that they only wanted the strongest men, and the men that were there were the healthy, landless, and surplus mill agricultural workers from regions not experiencing a labor shortage within Mexico were the only ones qualified to apply. Those people that were left were the people that were too young, too old, too sick, and rural landlords, urban dwellers, or women. So this also caused a disproportionate loss to those that could contribute to the greatest economic growth of Mexico. And so it's like, when people talk about the African American slaves, they only wanted the strongest, best workers. And then they were afraid when that's what they basically evolved to a workforce of only the strongest, mentally sound people. And they didn't allow for other people. So we are seeing the same issue with the Bracero program. Also, by sponsoring this exodus of millions of rural Mexican men, the program argues Rosa interrupted family life and reshaped gender norms and relations. In turn, however, Bracero workers and their families significantly affected the development of the Bracero program by refusing its limits, exploiting its opportunities, and defying the ideals pinned to managing their labor migration between the United States and Mexico. And that's on page 111. So Camacho was the previous president that was trying to bring back Camacho is the new president who is trying to bring back the confidence to the U.S. businessmen and settled suits that were brought under Cardenas. Transportations now become improved because people want to export from Mexico. They see that there is now agricultural wealth within their fields and they can buy it for cheaper and they can exploit the people even greater. The Mexican American Commission for the Economic Corporation, MICEC, I'm trying to find it on my page here, was formed in 1942, excuse me, and boasted members from among the top business leaders in each country. That year alone, the MICEC launched 16 projects that mixed war mobilization with Mexican industrialization, the agricultural development. Oh, I'm sorry, lost my page here. I apologize. I had to pause right there. I started having a coughing fit. So then, with this wartime demand, there was a lower crop yield and production in Mexico itself. The poor, for whom corn was a staple, were hardest hit by the crisis of 1943. A recovery in corn production did not begin until 1945. The decisions made by the U.S. and Mexican officials to shift production away from domestic products reflects the primacy of war production and their decisions and collusion of the Mexican and U.S. elite in the pursuit of a system of Mexican economic development that did not benefit the Mexican poor. Despite the lessons of 1943, Mexico continued its program to industrialize agricultural and produce crops for export. Domestic food shortages continued to plague the Mexican poor through the 1940s as the elites of each country grew closer. So what they're talking about in those wartime efforts was that Mexico had a decision. Are they going to join the Axis or are they going to join the Allies? That was Mexico and the United States' big fear about Mexico was all of a sudden they figured they better become real buddy-buddy with Mexico in order to make sure that they did not create enemies. The unsanctioned migration resulted in labor force losses in Mexico. The Mexicali border positioned military to help retain Mexicans to pick cotton crops in the Mexico regions. Because of all of this loss, they now realize that this was not economically growing Mexico, but it was creating more of a problem. Resentments from all sides, legal immigrants, illegal immigrants, and those that left for the north, damaging economic growth in the home country. On December 11th, 1943, the Mexican embassy in Washington warned the U.S. Department of State that if control was not established over the flow of illegal immigration into the U.S., Mexico would effect a complete revision of the Bracero agreements. The threat was passed from the Department of the State to the Department of Justice, the INS, and the Chief Supervisor of the U.S. Border Patrol, who, by 1943, was prepared to take centralized action to increase border enforcement along the U.S.-Mexico border. So basically, Mexico is now calling the Border Patrol to retain their own people. That's kind of scary tactic that the government would use instead of creating greater opportunities for their own people. 6 months later, there was a revision with this aggressive tactics. Special deportation parties of 1944 would rally any migrants as far north, I believe. I believe they went all the way up to Kansas in places. Uh, so they had the El Centro border parties, and they had some in McAllen, Texas. As far as Minnesota and North Dakota, they had tried to go commandeer Mexican nationals. In the picture posted on page 118 that I couldn't figure out how to put on my slideshow, it shows the Mexican deportees waiting in a holding area for apprehended aliens. U.S. Border Patrol official photographer file number 96 through 12, U.S. Immigration Patrol, McAllen, Texas, courtesy of the National Border Patrol Museum. In McAllen, Texas alone, they apprehended 6,900 men. Families had to rely on each other, and this is we start to see how the border patrol families isolated themselves and created their own communities, and the families had to rely on each other as the moves were frequent and the jobs demanded the men were gone quite often. This created a